Hey, hello. We know
Mhm.
it's been a minute and we didn't want to leave you hanging because we are absolutely committed to telling this story. And trust me, there is plenty left to tell. But our intention has always been to tell this in the most honest way we can. And in doing that, it's taken on a life of its own. When we started recording this, we didn't have an end to end script because, in all honesty, the story was still unfolding in many ways in real time. So, our moments of quiet since the last episode are not because we've run out of things to say, but because this year has been, well, a lot. So, rather than just disappearing into the holiday period, we thought we'd have a bit of a chat about what Jess's experience in recording this has been so far, where we're at now, and what's left to come.
You're so right, Keeks. It's been a massive lot. And also not something either of us could have predicted when we hit record for the first time. When we started telling this story, I honestly didn't know where it would go. I just knew it felt unbelievable. And maybe even more unbelievable that I stayed, that I thought enduring all of that was just part of the deal of loving someone.
Do you think you felt like that at the beginning or you feel like it now? So in listening to yourself and, a lot of this for you has been going through and rereading text messages and trying to remember the parts of the story to tell it. Is that a reflection you have now after having had that really deep retrospective experience? Or was that part of why you wanted to tell the story because you didn't believe you'd stayed?
I think we said right at the beginning in the first episode about the reasons why we want to tell the story. And I think they still stand. The difference between me now and me then was yes, there is finer detail that I had no idea about. And combing over everything with a fine tooth comb and seeing the truth of things that I had distorted in my head for survival, I suppose, has really opened my eyes to the reality of what it was. The biggest shift in me is rather than circling around what was wrong with him and why he did the things he did, was looking at my own role and my own well-being in that, and how I neglected my own well-being. And that's sort of where I'm sitting at now, trying to reconcile with myself. How could I neglect myself so much? And that tells me we're not at the end of this story yet. There's still so much for me to discover and to figure out, but I can see myself moving through this with more clarity, I suppose.
I think what's interesting in just the conversations we have, not that are being recorded, I think you have a lot of shame or guilt that you experience for yourself. Not that other people are putting on you, but I'm just hearing it so much in the way you speak an awful lot. And I kind of disagree a little there because I think you really tried so often to advocate for your own well-being. And you had some pretty firm boundaries, and so many of the conversations you and I were having across that year were around how to enforce them. But I think one thing I feel very strongly in listening is the conversations you and I were having and the advice I was giving you was not appropriate for what you were really going through because you were going through that completely internally and like behind the curtain, you know?
It's interesting to reflect on when we talk about things like this. I try and grasp what the actual reality was. I try and find firm ground to go, oh, this is what was happening. I've consistently tried to logic my way through this, but the reality is there are so many layers. It's so complex. When I try to articulate something in one sentence, I just can't. And then I get overwhelmed and I can't explain to you the layers because I think you're right. There were times I tried to reinforce boundaries. I tried to stand up for myself. I bit back a lot, like going through the text messages. I can see parts of myself coming out going, no way, no thank you, sir. But the complexity of who this human is doesn't respond to those boundaries in the way that a normal person would. And so, yeah. And then I fall back on like, what more could I have done for myself other than walk out the door? And that's the biggest question. Why don't you walk out the door? And I think we're learning a lot more about why through this. And, I think another huge part has been the conversations we've had with other people. And we've met some pretty amazing human beings as a result of hitting record and putting this out there.
I completely agree with you. I think that's been one of the highlights of this experience so far is just the way that telling a story creates a network. And that was so much of why we wanted to do this was just to help people hear themselves in what you were saying because there's so much universality in it in small ways and in big ways. But the way that's been reflected back has been so powerful, both from people who know this person as well. That's been really huge and infuriating and has made me so much angrier at him and the way he is, but also in people who are so willing to share their own experiences and are on the same journey of storytelling that you're on, Jess, and for the same reasons. And there's that duality of feeling, oh my God, I hate this guy so much every time we lift a rock and something else comes out. And there's a little bit more truth about this particular person and how much space he's insisting on taking up on the planet and in other people's lives, but the really incredible network of humans that we have met as a result of it who have been so willing to jump in and support you, Jess, for telling your story and tell us a little bit of their story and want to make it easier for people who are victims of coercive control and domestic violence and manipulation more broadly to find ways to safety. That's been such an incredibly powerful thing.
Yeah, I think you spoke earlier about the shame that I carry, and a huge result of this podcast has been lifting that shame and not holding it because I feel like the shame's not mine to hold, it's his. It belongs with him. And through all of these conversations we'd had and these layers of people, there's people in my family who have stepped up and shown so much compassion and care and have said, why didn't you come to us? You can always come to us. That has been huge. I've had friends who've come forward, and I think this has been a healing journey for me and my close friends around me who sort of looked at it and were like, what more could we have done? And the answer is, you did everything you could, and it was beautiful and it was life saving. And then people who knew him that we didn't know existed and who have suffered at the hands of him themselves and have been really generous with sharing their experiences and how they've gotten through. And then there are complete strangers. There are people who have come forward with stories about their own journeys. And you're right, so many people go through similar situations that are just horrifying. Also, people in my life who are close to me and I've known for a very long time who have then shared stories with me of similar experiences that I had no idea they'd gone through. And to hear that someone close to me has been suffering in silence, but now they feel empowered to share that because we've been talking about it, it has been incredible, and it has been releasing the shame that I held at the beginning of this. And I am still working through that. And I think shame is now shifting into accountability. And it's sort of going, am I accountable for certain parts of what went on here? Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. And that's something I'm going to work through, but we'll figure it out. And we're still talking about it. And I will always be honest about how I'm feeling about something at any point in time.
I think that's actually been a really beautiful thing to observe through it too, is hearing your family listen to it and just show so much support for not just you, but for victims broadly. It's been such a beautiful thing to see. And you have a lot of people who love you and are very proud of you, Jess. But I think one thing I experienced in making this so far is just a deep confusion about why so many people lie about having cancer. I thought it was shocking with Danny, but it happens all the time, and I just will never understand it. I hope I don't understand it, but it's just wild to me.
And I think this is one of those complex things, right? There's not one answer as to why. It's not one rule book on if this, then lie about cancer. I don't think that's how it goes. But I've been reflecting on why Danny did, and I still ask that question, why did he lie to me about cancer? But the more we worked through the story and the more I realized how calculated everything was, I thought this was driven by unwellness and trauma and someone's life crumbling beneath them. But the more we've learned and the more people have shared with us, we've understood how actually this was calculated in a lot of ways. And so the cancer story to me feels less like a trauma response and more like a calculated attempt to put me in a certain position. And, I can speculate what that is for hours. And I won't at this point. I think maybe that's something we're still learning about. But yeah, I think the intention was probably not great.
And, we've obviously shared a lot of little internet memes because your algorithm knows you well now, Jessica. But there was one in particular that talks about common traits in some of the most famous serial killers being one of their first acts is to lure you in with a story that's designed to evoke sympathy. And I'm not in any way suggesting that Danny is anything more sinister than Danny, but it does feel so often like what he does is collect other people's interesting stories, and he's got a little book that he writes them down, things I haven't experienced or lived out that one yet, so let's do a little play. And we certainly know a bit more of the truth behind the cancer lie now, so
That's
it
so
does
interesting,
feel.
yeah. Even that you say that now because, in my head, we're talking about why did he lie about cancer, and then I'm like, "Well, I think I know now. I think he was somewhat testing me and seeing if I'm empathetic or if I'd withdraw and if I would move into a caregiver role and give him the space and the rope that he was seeking." But then you say this, and I go, "Oh, well, we actually know where that story came from now, and we know that he borrowed it." Borrowed it? He stole it from someone else. We know that to be true. So then is it more just an entertaining thing for him to take on these stories that he's writing down? And, even throughout the relationship, I had said that, I think to you and maybe to Wayne, that I have a feeling that he learns of someone's experience and then takes it on. And I thought that was some kind of pathology, but I don't know anymore. There's so much that we don't know the answer to and probably
Mhm.
will never know because he's not one to come forward and admit. I mean, that's also been really hard to reckon with is I'm never going to get the truth from this person.
I think that's a really good thing to talk about because before we even talked about doing this, that was just something that you couldn't wrap your head around is I just want to know what's true. I just want to know what the truth is. There's been truths that have come through this, but the infuriating thing is it just feels like he will never be able to say, oh, yeah, no, I lied. Sorry. It's just not actually possible for him to do that.
No, and my communication with him went all the way up into September of this year, and so it's been a big, wild year even after ending our relationship, and there have been moments where I have kinda held up evidence, like, "Exhibit A, sir. I know the truth, and still, no matter how much evidence I can present, it will never lead to an admission. It'll always lead to more lies or more confusion for me." And so I've learned a lot in what I can and can't expect from this person. And I think it's been getting harder the more we move through the story and sort of hit these months where we're at now. We were at this point where a lot of glass shattered, the truth came out, and I was sort of at a point where it was like, "Oh, no, I can't be in denial myself anymore. I have to accept what's happening." And then it started to get real nasty. And I think the biggest shift and why it has been somewhat difficult as we're moving closer to this period in the recordings, in the story, is that it turned from this sort of performative version of Danny that was trying to convince me of something to this real, genuine, resentful, rageful human being who I think loathed me, and so it gets harder to accept as we're moving towards the end. And we're so far from the end, really, aren't we? I keep thinking like, "Oh, we're wrapping it up. We're wrapping it up." It's just getting worse. It's just getting to the part where it's sort of snowballing and
We're sort of just in the middle, which is really interesting. And there obviously we will have to pick a point and say, this person's story will continue to be absolutely terrifying for all of eternity. But there have been, even in the last couple of months, the brazenness and I guess the arrogance more specifically of the ways he continues to try to assert himself into your life. So I do mean the showing up in the vicinity of our place of work, and there would be no reason for this person to be there except for that. And oh no, the reason for him to do that would be to scare you. That's what that is. And I think that that's such an interesting, there's an interesting thing in that for me because it's been just about exactly a year, maybe just over a year by a week or so since you did leave and you did walk out the door. And some of the conversation from other people is, oh, we're still talking about it. Just got to move on like it was the end of a bad relationship. But so many of the beautiful people who we have met through doing this podcast have really given sound advice, or not advice, but insight into where that inability to just say, well, done and dusted, door closed. I'm not, seeking this person, not thinking about them anymore. I'm well and truly done. So I'm just going to move on. Like where the barrier to doing that is in exiting a relationship with someone like this.
I like the word barrier because it sometimes feels like it's impossible to stop. And I have really struggled with the idea of not being able to move on, whatever that means. What does moving on mean? And I love that you bring up insights because I can sit in front of my therapist and have really productive conversations and talk about the deep psychology underneath all of this and the things that I need to start doing to put in place. But then there's still something in my head that won't let me move on. And I can intellectualize it. I can intellectualize a lot of this, and we've said that in the past. But there's still something in my head that says I can't move on. And I think we've had that insight from other people who have been through very traumatic situations where you would think the first thing they want to do is forget about it and move on. And having that insight from someone who knows what it is and knows what it feels like to not be able to let go. And I don't even think that's the right language. I don't think it's not being able to let go. And you might be able to articulate this better than I can, but it's about needing to know the truth of someone, of that person that was able to take hold of your life and nearly destroy it. I want to know everything about that person, because if they have the key to do that, I need to understand how to lock that up.
Well, because knowledge is power, right? And one big characteristic of your relationship with Danny, and I think in a lot of these very abusive and controlling dynamics, is the lack of knowledge. So your entire relationship was built on not knowing anything except for what he drip fed you and finding truth in whatever those lies could be. And so it does make a bit of sense that maybe the healing process is amassing as much knowledge as you possibly can to correct how little you had.
Absolutely. And I don't know what the end result of that is. We were having a conversation the other day about a legal matter that was occurring in his life. And usually I'd be right on it and I'd want to update and I would start investigating. But I actually forgot it was happening.
Mm.
And that was such an accomplishment for me. That was an achievement, being able to forget and not have it be top of mind. So maybe that's the slow wean away from it. My brain will slowly forget, but for now, there's still so much I need to understand. And I think doing this podcast and talking to people and sharing the story and having people be interested in the journey as well and understand how I've lived through it has given me permission to go, actually, I don't have to move on at any particular time. I can take my time and trust that if people don't want to hear about it, they can either stop listening to the podcast or they can just politely tell me that it's too much and that's okay. You know, I'm giving myself a lot more permission these days, which is nice.
I think it's very important thing. And you and I have had some really frank conversations over the last couple of months about whether or not this was something that you wanted to carry on doing. And for me, the most important thing is your wellness and your ability to basically like exercise this person from your life. And I'd like to just highlight a couple of the points you've made in those discussions around what the impact of storytelling can be, where systems and institutions that you should be able to trust are not standing up in the way that you would want them to or moving far too slowly, and the way that the injustice of that slow moving institution or the lack of stand up and defense of systems is actually creating barriers for people being safer, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Part of learning about other people's experiences has been understanding that I'm not the first person that's been harmed by this guy. And that was a real anger moment for me. And I never thought I would be the one who's sort of like the system fails people, because I hadn't engaged systems in this relationship. I hadn't had a reason to call the police. I hadn't had a reason to go to court. I didn't want to get an order against him. So I had done my best to avoid systems. And, 1 year is a reasonably short relationship. And so I think that's a credit to the support systems I had around me. But learning about this previous harm that he had caused, yes, I did start to get very disappointed in those that already knew what his behaviors were and knew the calculation behind what he did. And so everybody has a reason why they choose to hold on to something or to share something. And I think sometimes it can be more of a reflection of safety and empowerment rather than neglect. But when it comes to an institution, there's a responsibility there. And I think for me, it was just that, oh shit, systems really do fail people. I've understood that my whole life, but I've never experienced it to that degree. And so a bit of a disappointment, a slight bit of activism in me to going, okay, well, if I believe that, now it's my job to step up and do the thing. And so I think really trying to do that in my own ways. And look, I'm going to talk about what actions I am choosing to take, but I think this podcast is one of them. And
Well,
I'm really proud of that at this point. I'm proud of both of us for doing that.
Well, I'm very proud of you. Very, very proud, Jessica.
Stop it. No. But there are a lot of emotions attached to stepping up and sharing your story. And so I think two key things for me was, well, three really, but we've talked about shame, and shame is falling away the more I share my story. The second one is I still care for this person. And whether or not that's conditioning or not, it still doesn't feel nice to think that they are suffering in any kind of way. You know, people can go down that I want nothing but retaliation. I want them to hurt because they hurt me. That is not a feeling that I have experienced here. There have been moments where I've been really angry about the things he did to me, and then the discoveries I've made since and going, how could you lie to me about that? But I still don't want him to suffer. And this is a person who is not afraid to tell you that they're suffering. And so I think that's part of the conditioning. But then that leads into the third, and that is feeling really guilty about a lot of things. There are a lot of layers of guilt in existing in a relationship like this and then leaving in a relationship like this.
I think the only thing I'll just say to that is I completely understand where you're coming from when you articulate your feeling of guilt and wanting that person to be, not in a position of suffering. But it is choice at the end of it, as in everything he chooses to do is his own choice. And you can't control it, even if you could take it on for him, if you could take on every experience for everyone that you love. Choices and consequences, right?
That is it. And so, I will take accountability for the choices I made. And so I could reasonably expect that he could do the same. And I think that's it, right? You should have expectations of partners. If you're in a relationship with someone, it's okay to expect something from them. I'm getting to that point of going, oh, I had boundaries and I had expectations and you didn't meet them. And that's okay that I don't want to be a part of that. So
Well, he just wasn't very reasonable. So I think we could probably talk about this forever, and that's why we have podcasts. But there are some pretty big things that are about to come into the story. We're going to meet your mum, your beautiful mum's insight into this next chapter and a whole slew of psychobabble that it comes with it. Anything you want to tell the listeners about what's coming up next, or anything you want to share about how you're feeling about this next and hopefully final half of
it's an
that story?
incredibly overwhelming period of my life and my relationship, and I think this is where the fear really kicked in and my unwellness really kicked in. I got really, really unwell towards the end of our relationship, quite physically and emotionally. I was a mess, and mentally I was falling apart. So there's a lot of wild behaviors, but at the same time, there was also a real unraveling of myself. And so I think it's going to be important for us to find that balance of going, yes, a lot of this is very entertaining because it is so wild. And I just want to stick to that opening line that we have in our disclaimer. We say we're not here to sensationalize. And I really don't want it to seem like we're doing that. Yes, it is sensational because not a lot of people do the things that Danny had done in this period, but it was real life and it had real life impacts for me. And I think a lot of people around me started to be impacted by it as well. So I want to handle it with a lot of care. And I think that's why we're taking our time.
Couldn't agree with you more. And to that point, I just want to say we would love to answer some of the questions you may have around what was happening, around how she was feeling about it. Any questions that might feel pretty blunt, we'd love to bring in the audience voice a little bit more and really encourage you to reach out to us through our social media channels with those questions. Where we can, we will answer them.
Answering questions has been a real helpful part of this for me. People see things from all kinds of different beautiful perspectives, and having someone else look in and go, actually, have you considered this? Or I've been through this. We've had a few people reach out to us through our Instagram at Beyond Curious Show. Also, yeah, absolutely welcome any questions. I have opted in to tell this story and to be open about it. And as I said, the shame is lifting for me. So I don't think there's much anyone could do to hurt my feelings at this point.
Except say you're not funny.
Well, yes. Look, I think that's another, actually, it's a really good point. I'd like to talk about humor. These don't feel like very funny topics to be talking about, but being able to laugh with people and to realize that there are beautiful things in life and laughing is one of them. And so we are always here for humor. There are lines with humor, as there are lines with most things, but there's nothing wrong with having a giggle.
So before we sign off, Jess, is there anything else that you wanted to say or share or leave our audiences with?
I'd just like to say thank you, Keeks, for doing this with me. It's been a wonderful 4 months sitting down and learning how to do this podcasting thing. It has been therapeutic, but it has also been friendship making, and I hope we can continue recording well into the future, telling many beautiful stories together.
So do I, Jess. Thank you for trusting me with it. And with that, we want to wish all of our listeners a very happy, a very healthy holiday period. Let's be frank, it's been a pretty hard year to be a human, and particularly in Australia, it's been a very hard month. As we've spoken about so much today, we have found so much support and love in a community that we didn't know existed around us. And so we want to say to all of our listeners, if you are struggling, if you need to reach out, we're here. We want to listen. In a world where it can feel so hard to breathe sometimes, if we can just help each other to breathe easier, that's what we would love to do. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for giving us a minute to tell this story well. And we're looking forward to coming back and spending more time with you in your earballs in 2026.
See you in the new year.
Bye.